This podcast is brought to you by PC component retailer and boutique builder Silvernight PCs. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to get 6% off everything on their website. And it is also brought to you by CDKeyOffer.com that gets you great deals on Windows keys and other products. You can find links in the description and the proper offer codes for all of these sponsors, and we'll talk about them later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, highly annoyed Tom, and today I am joined by my co-host,
highly annoyed and delayed Dan.
Yeah, we are starting this recording, which we were expecting to be an easier episode. I don't know, an hour or so late at the night, because I don't want to get into it because I like to avoid saying what went wrong until like a week after things happen to make sure I understand 100% what was going on. And I don't think it's in good taste to throw companies under the bus. But let's say one of the soft pieces of software we use to back up and record things over the cloud just decided to completely stop working right when we wanted to record.
Which is always appreciated.
Well, it's always very appreciated. And then I was just like, I don't know, Dan, give me a second. I just found an entirely other service, set up an account. Now we're rolling.
Yep.
So if there's any issues with this recording, whether it's lower video quality, whether there just turns out we don't have video when you're listening to this, know that we are always at least as annoyed as you are.
And if there's no video this week, I guess we'll just draw some stick figures or something and have those be stand-ins this week, right?
No, I think that would actually be more work than me like doing something much simpler.
Okay. No stick figures then.
But do I sound okay, Dan? Is there any static? Is there any weird noises? Anything?
I can hear you. So I think we're fine.
There's no but there's no this has happened, Dan, where there's just like static whenever someone talks.
No, I'm not hearing any of that.
Okay. Well, before I just punch a hole in the wall, let us get into the reader mails. Dr. Foreman writes in and he says, I wanted to take a minute and give condolences to Tom and his family for their loss of Reesie. Being a supporter, it's tough on us too because Reesie will be missed, and I really thank you for sharing her with us as long as you could while she was a member of the channel. Yeah, I mean, this is something that I figured we'd throw in this reader mail just to acknowledge a fan, writing in. Thank you for writing in and sharing your condolences, Dr. Foreman, but also just because, I put out an update on the Moore's Law's Dead Patreon first, then the Moore's Law's Dead Discord, then the YouTube channel, which got, I think, more likes than most videos, meaning it seems like most fans who are subscribed to the Moore's Law's Dead channel on YouTube saw the update. But I also thought it would be good, because during the recent live stream, someone mentioned, where's Reesie? And I was like, I don't know where you've been, but I thought it would be good to open up the episode by making that clear so that it's very hard for you to not know the news by now that Reesie lost her battle to cancer of, a week or two ago. And it was a long time coming. And the one good thing about cancer is you have time to prepare for it mentally. So it wasn't really a shock, although it was a really rough week. And that's why you saw no content drops for an entire week there over Thanksgiving break, which at least you were here, Dan, physically, and so was our family, so that made it a little easier. But yeah, we're rolling forward. There's a new silly dog that I'm looking to adopt, not because I intended to adopt the dog so quickly, but because just right away. Honestly, we come from a family of crazy dog people. So if there's any chance anyone in our family, or even some of our friends, are looking for a dog, our mom, our dad, our friends' parents, even sometimes, it's just I'm getting links of dogs in the area. Like, you get a dog. I've been getting links of dogs in the area all year from family members, even though I'm like, I don't know if I want to adopt one right now. And we figured, it's not about when you adopt a dog, it's about if the right one comes along, and we think the perfect one popped along right away.
Yeah.
So I don't know when you'll be seeing Jessie on camera much. She appeared in the live stream briefly. You want to go check that out. But she'll probably start appearing here and there within a month. But she is a puppy. She's insanely smart. I have a dog seatbelt that I would use for Reesie when I was driving with her in the car. Jessie has figured out how to undo the seatbelts. She almost knows how to open up doors. And honestly, I don't know. The list of things of less than 1 year old dog has already figured out how to do is ridiculous.
Yeah, she seems pretty smart, and I don't know. She likes being around, so I won't be surprised if she just randomly pops up in the background at some point in this episode too, or something. Because she is I don't know. She likes being near people.
Well, and I do have a camera downstairs, so if every now and then I look distracted like I do right now, it might just be me looking downstairs to make sure, which I wanted a smart dog, but the downside is they just sometimes decide to take things apart, making sure, it looks like my kitchen is still intact, that she's not downstairs doing something terrible. So,
which, hey, yeah, that's good, I guess.
That's good. It's good she's not doing that right now. Let's not reward her until the podcast is over and I can verify my house is mostly in one piece. But all right, let us move on from that and just jump right into the corrections. So Falto writes in and he says, in Broken Silicon 181, you guys talked about the Joy-Con drift. It wasn't 181, was it? It would have been... Oh, he's probably talking about me and Hogue. It says, you and Hogue talked about the Joy-Con drift issue. I'd like to add on to that conversation. Nintendo actually has quietly changed a component of the Joy-Con regarding the thumbstick, but sadly it was only for a Skyward Sword model, not all newly made Joy-Cons. And he has links, and we'll put those in the description talking about this. There's also, I'd like to mention that Sony, whose DualSense models suffered from drift, they actually quietly changed all newly made controllers after a certain point. I believe it was early this year when the changeover happened, and never publicly stated this. To tell if you have the new model, you need to look at the back of the controller where it says FCC ID. At the end of that ID, if it's an A, then it means you have a newer model which seems to have less drift. Now, this conversation came up when me and Hogue were talking about kind of the things NVIDIA would be doing to give as little ammunition to lawyers as they can who might file a lawsuit against them for the 16-pin issues, which I hypothesized or that maybe a reason they took so long to respond, maybe why they haven't really officially said that there is any issues with the 16-pin port, even though they're probably going to have an updated version of it come out from SIG, is probably because they just don't want to say anything wrong or even accidentally say something to the effect of, we are changing something, because that would admit they knew something was wrong or they acknowledged something was wrong. Actually, since then, though, I believe SIG has said, you're all plugging things in wrong. It's your fault. So I don't know that any change will come to the 16-pin standard in the short term.
So for the 16-pin, I don't know. I mean, I think it would be nice if they had a minimum change the design so it was more obvious was more obvious when things were correctly seated. But, I guess if they don't want to change it, they don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that conversation came up with, a lot of people suppose that the reason Nintendo hasn't updated the Joy-Cons is because technically it should pass what they believe they could reasonably prove in court is a reasonable amount of longevity. And if they were to update the parts, then that would maybe give ammunition to lawyers that, oh, there was something wrong, you just updated it. But I don't know. It sounds like they did it for Skyward Sword, so I'm not really sure what that's about, though. I continue to doubt that the reason they haven't updated the Joy-Con is simply because they just want you to buy more of them. But I don't know. The fact that Sony's done it and they're not getting sued, maybe it is they just don't care and they want you to buy a bunch of Joy-Cons for a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't know. The stick drift issue is a really annoying one that I wish they would just resolve, honestly, because I don't know.
Have you had you said you had it with one of your PS5 controllers?
Yeah, one of my PS5 controllers just is unusable.
No. Yeah, I don't think any of mine do, but I think I have like 3 or so. So like it's been less used probably than you using one controller, and I never saw drift issues until like halfway through the PS4 generation or like I've never really seen it in controllers until halfway through a generation, whether it's Xbox or PlayStation. But I guess if you have one controller, you've already ran into it. So there you go.
Yeah, and when I say unusable, like I mean if I'm not touching the stick, like I just turn like that quickly. Like it's it's a problem.
I believe you. But okay, I guess the new ones, Dan, if you give them more money, at least won't have the issue, unlike with Nintendo, where they will never fix it, it seems, unless you buy a special edition controller. TMC Payton writes in, and he says, in Broken Silicon 180, a question was asked about 40 frames per second modes on console, and that being the midpoint between 30 FPS and 60 FPS. Tom claimed the midpoint is 45 frames per second, which, in my own defense, I'm only claiming 45 is halfway between 30 and 60, people. But he says, looking at frame times, not frame rates, it should be known that 40 frames per second is actually the midpoint between the two. 33.3 milliseconds at 30 frames per second, 16.6 milliseconds at 60 frames per second, and 25 milliseconds at 40 frames per second. Looking at the graph of y equals 1 over x, this explains the diminishing returns of higher FPS when it comes to frame times, and the midpoint not being halfway, unlike with frames per second. So did you look into this at all? Because I actually have a pretty lengthy thing to add on to this. I wanted to throw that at you just so you'd look into it as well.
I mean, no, that's not wrong. Like, frame times are, if you divide 1,000 by 40, you get 25 milliseconds.
Mm-hmm. So I reached out to a developer, though, and asked what he thought, should we be going for 45 versus 40? And I'm almost exactly quoting him here. I changed it a little bit, but he says, my personal thoughts are that 40 frames per second should be the new ideal for games that can't hit 60 easily, as it's directly between 60 and 30, at least in terms of frame times. Also, 40, it divides evenly into both 120 and 240 hertz displays. Perceptually, I find that 4K 40 frames per second feels closer to 4K 60 gameplay than to 4K 30, but the problem with 40 frames per second is actually that 60 hertz display standard. Game developers are very sensitive to making sure they can guarantee a standard experience to all gamers, and the adoption of HDMI 2.1 has been a major hurdle in the adoption of 40 Hz as a game standard. For instance, in the game I'm working on right now, it hits 60 frames per second in Unreal Engine 5 at most times, but there's a single heavy vegetation area that blends between two post-processing volumes, and there's an entire region of assets that brings performance below 40 frames per second at times. These situations happen in games which can interfere with the guaranteed experience for gamers. And currently, the fact that many TVs don't support 4K 120 makes users choose between enabling 4K 30 in the settings or 1440p 60 or even 1080p or even 1080p 120 or 60 at times, instead of having access to 4K 40. And that's likely the biggest barrier to the sort of 40 frames per second, not 30 frames per second adoption, I think should personally happen sooner rather than later. And I never considered those aspects, only a developer would probably think of, which is 40 divides into 120, right? So that's really nice. But unless you have an adaptive sync 4K 120 hertz TV, even though those are pretty much just the standard of high-end TVs now, it's a major issue for them. I thought that was really interesting.
No, it does need to be noted, I guess. And I guess it's nice as time goes on, more and more people are just getting 120 frames per second, because I think that's, more so starting to become a standard feature versus 60 frames per second. Although, still have to wonder, I bet most TVs being sold these days are still 60 hertz, but
I don't think so. I think most of them come with a 120 hertz mode, unless they're very budget.
They should.
But sometimes it's just 1080p 120. Not all of them could do 4K 120. And I'm trying to think of, like, for example, I just actually, my girlfriend got me God of War Ragnarok for my birthday, and I was playing it, and it had like 6 different frame rate options. And one of them was like favoring frame rate uncapped, and I tested it, and it's typically running dynamically around 1440p, because my LG TV lets me test this, which is cool. It's running around 1440p 80, 90 most of the time. And I've got to say, with adaptive sync, with all of the little tweaks the developer can do for this one model running at these settings, it looks super sharp, and it definitely feels better than 60. I really wish adaptive sync 4K 120 could just become the gold standard, because you're seeing even console games make good use of this. But the reason not every developer does this is apparently, I don't know. I really wish it was like 1440p dynamic resolution 120 and then 4K 40 hertz minimum dynamic resolution. That'd be really nice. And it seems like this developer I talked to, he's like, oh yeah, we all wish we could do that, but different HDMI standards just aren't really letting. It's a hindrance to making that an option. It takes extra work.
I mean, it's nice to see it adopted as a feature in some games, especially with this new console generation where, you know, I think a lot of people are at different points with what they have for their TVs or monitors. So it's nice when a dev can embrace that and, you know, give people something between, like, as many options as there are reasonable on a console between 1440p and 4K with variable frame rates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess just let me remind people of that. Of all the hardware things you can buy, a good monitor, let me tell you, even running on a $400, I guess because the disc, $500 PS5, God of War Ragnarok at this mode looks incredible, up there with the best PC games running on my 4090.
Yeah.
Even though I have a nice, you know, studio color accurate 4K 120 IPS monitor, I'm telling you guys, get a nice monitor before you get a 4090, you know, or something, even like a 6700 XT or something, right? Like this is something you want. It really still can look incredible even with a console. And I'd rather have a PS5 in an OLED TV, just saying it, than like a 4090 in a cheap monitor. Easiest decision of my life.
Well, yeah, it's like oddly a thing. I don't know. Some people seem to not think about just, you know, having a nice monitor before you even think about getting a graphics card, because really the biggest potential bottleneck of a system is your monitor. If you have a 1080p 60 monitor, it doesn't matter what frame rates and resolutions you can push. Although I don't think I'm suggesting there are many people getting 4090s that have a 1080p 60 monitor. Although
no,
maybe one.
That's something I don't. No, but that's something I believe I saw a couple of tech tubers make fun of. Maybe a couple years ago, was you don't see that as much anymore. Not tech tubers, but like more casual PC websites, or like someone who like is a writer on IGN who just was handed the job to do a PC video. Mm-hmm. And how many of those people like received a free 3090 and like were gaming on a 1080p 60 monitor? Like, I don't think most people listening to this podcast do that, but I have seen it, Dan. That's all I would say.
Yeah, I'm sure it's happened.
But as you might expect, it was people that didn't have to buy it themselves. So yeah, I stand corrected on the difference. I guess I'm technically right, literally from frame rates from 45 is the midpoint between 30 and 60. But yeah, the frame time thing I did not know about, and thank you for the correction, TMC Payton, and I hope you appreciated the extra effort I put into making sure the correction was well-rounded and brought even more information to the table from a developer. But continuing this conversation, Braz Ghost writes in and he says, hello, Tom and Dan. I do feel it should be kept at 60 hertz is a wrong perception. So this is going back to where we were talking about a 40 hertz should be a new standard for consoles. And I basically said, get good and just make it 60, developers. That was my opinion. But he says, I have a few buddies that are not hardcore gamers. They're the ones that just sit down and play after work or class. I put them to the test with what they preferred when I showed them the difference between 30 and 60. The 30 I set to as high settings as possible with more details, including ray tracing if possible. And then I did 60 with as high as I could do, hitting a solid frame rate on that as well on my PC. He had a 3080, by the way, and 5800X or 1500X 3D, I believe. And he said, all my friends picked 30 because they found it way prettier with the shadows, etc. When I told them about the difference, they were like, oh, I do see the difference, but I don't really notice when playing. The other one just looks better. And I kind of came to the conclusion, even though this was just a small sample size, that frame rate does not matter to the average gamer. Looks matter, though it might have mattered because I asked to compare. So, yeah, and I don't know, Braz Ghost, I feel skeptical of what you said because, like, we listen to some podcasts that aren't predominantly PC gamers, and even a lot of those people, like one of them was Colin Moriarty, said that he thought 30 hertz was fine. got a PS5 when that came out and was like, never mind, everything should be 60. I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, and I think a lot of the perception that came in the PS3 era, that 30 hertz is okay, or even, I love this term that never goes away and it never should, cinematic 30 hertz. I love, but you have to remember that back then, what they called 60, like Call of Duty on console games, sometimes it was, but often it was dropping to 30 or 40 anyways. And so if you had a locked 30 and a shaky 60, I think a lot of people back then thought, well, 60 is nice, but not essential. Now that we have like so many console and PC games that have no trouble hitting 60 hertz, I don't know. I think, and even these console gamers I'm bringing up, technically, I guess you'd say they're hardcore gamers, even if they're not on PC, because they play so much. Maybe their eyes can detect it more than the average casual gamer. But I don't know. I think that it's easier to sell 30 hertz in a commercial because obviously you're not playing the game and it's a commercial. Mm-hmm. And we're fine with movies being at 24 hertz. But I don't know. Do you agree? I just find it hard to believe he actually had a group of friends that didn't care about 60 hertz.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I've really ever met anyone that has a hard time distinguishing between 60 and 30. Even if, like, at the end of the day, you would prefer, like, higher quality at 30 FPS.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess let me make this one more argument here on this, too. I think I understand also why on the PS3 and the 360 and all the consoles before that, and even graphics cards. Again, go look up graphics card reviews in the mid-2000s. A lot of reviews say we were able to hit 30 hertz, which feels great. Like they just said that 60 hertz as a standard is a fairly recent luxury. But back then, we were getting so much better graphics every year that I feel like the difference between 30 and 60 looked a lot better. Visually.
Yeah, that's true.
However, now we're hitting diminishing returns in graphics. The difference between medium and ultra now is not what it was 10 years ago. So I think make it 60, please.
Especially on a lot of games and resolutions where if you're gaming at like 1080p and 1440p, like I think the differences for some settings will literally be imperceptible at those resolutions. So yeah, I'm going to choose losing literally no graphical fidelity for a higher frame rate in a lot of contexts. And yeah, even so, like the difference between ultra and high in most games it's pretty hard to tell in most games unless you're like freezing frames and looking to find
even
the micro differences.
Even then it can be with a freezed frame.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think that's something that plays into my argument here too, is it's like, we're getting to higher and higher levels of diminishing returns, but the difference between having double the frame rate, I don't know, medium to ultra isn't what it used to be, so I say go for 60. Although I think having 40 hertz as a standard now, if they could make it one, would be a nice option, and I just want 30 to die now.
Yeah.
Because I can't stand it, even in like games like, Until Dawn or Detroit Become Human or Heavy Rain, that type of like interactive thing. I just can't stand 30 hertz. Even in like games that barely have gameplay, I cannot stand it. But okay, let us then move on to the first story here. Story number 1: Moore's Law is dead. Leaks Ryzen Zen 4 non-X release date, pricing, and clock speeds. All right, here we go. On the 1st of December, yours truly of the Moore's Law is Dead team leaked the following Ryzen 7000 details. Ryzen non-X SKUs will be launching on January 10th, and not only to OEMs as some people speculated. There will be the R9 7900 12 core that should hit 5.4 gigahertz boost, have a 65 watt TDP, and have a price between $400 and $460. There's the R7 7700 that hits 5.3 gigahertz boost, 65 watt TDP again, and should be priced between $310 and $350. Then there's the R5 7600 that will have a boost clock of up to 5.2 gigahertz, 65 watt TDP yet again, pricing $220 to $250. Now, the reason I have a range on this one specifically is just like actually with like Raptor Lake and a few other, and Alder Lake, which I got the pricing very close on that one, is I don't know what AMD will decide to say the MSRP is. What I do know is what they're selling these to. Yeah, what they're selling these to retailers for before the retailers add a markup. So I would suggest the 7900 is likely to be below 450, likely to be above 410. I would suggest the 7700 is likely to be closer to 330 to 350, and the 7600 230 to 240 or 50. But technically, I know where they could go if they wanted to have very little markup. And so to recap, though, what I know is that the boost clocks of the 12, 8, and 6 core non-X models is 5.4, 5.3, and 5.2 gigahertz respectively. They all have a 65 watt TDP. Although remember, you can change the TDP in any high-end motherboard setting. Yeah, they're a 15 to 30% haircut in price compared to the X variants. And also interestingly, AMD is subsidizing the cost of the X variants right now. That's why they're cheaper. And that subsidy expires in the middle of January. Now, I'm warned they could extend it. Nothing's stopping AMD from extending that subsidy. But I would argue that would be silly if they would be subsidizing prices for like 3 months in a row over an official price drop. And so I would suggest if they really do launch something like a $440 7900, $350 or $330 maybe even 7700, and $240 7600, that they should probably drop the 7950X to $600, 7900X to $480, 7700X to $380, and 7600X to $280. And outside of that opinion, I don't know what else there is left to say. It seems that AMD can, as we on Moore's Laws that have consistently reported for the past few months, easily afford to do a price drop on these SKUs, whereas Intel cannot due to already reporting in their earnings razor-thin margins, unlike AMD, for some of their products they're selling. And things are about to get much worse than the non-X, X3D, and cheaper motherboards arrive by boat in January for AMD products. So, yeah, I don't know. I'll leave it to you, Dan. This pricing, these models, what are your thoughts? I mean, what are your thoughts on these models of by themselves? And then what do you think about what this means for Raptor Lake?
Well, I think with the price drops for the or temporary price drops we've seen on like Newegg and Amazon, it kind of pushes the like recommendation equation pretty heavily towards AMD to begin with already. And it would be nice if those prices remain low on the X models, but if they release like these 3 non-X models and they're in the middle of that price range, like you said, so like $440 or something for the 7900, I mean, that's kind of just getting to the prices you and I had talked about that we wish the X models were at already, and they're dropping free clock speeds by like 2%, a little under 2%. I mean, it kind of
I'm sure the base clocks will be lower, but remember, you can set a higher, you can turn on precision boost overdrive for these, I think, or at least set a higher TDP in the motherboards. Anyway, so whatever, it'll be like 2% worse for each one or something.
Yeah, it kind of just turns into almost a blanket recommendation, I think, then for getting the non-X models, like the 7600 with like a cheaper B650 motherboard sounds like if you're insisting on getting a newer generation CPU, sounds like the obvious choice. I mean, I still think 5600X or something is still a viable option, obviously, but yeah. And then if you're the 7700 is probably one of the best gaming CPUs, if not the best you can get without really having any compromises. And versus something like the 7700X, I don't really know what you're compromising on. Like, I guess in a game, instead of getting 120 frames per second, maybe you'll get 119.5. Like,
I think what you'll get is 200 frames and 198 frames in some games, and most games you'll be 400 or 380. Like these CPUs are all so overkill for gaming, and they have been for several generations now.
Yeah, so I think those non-X models kind of just sound like they're Zen 4's getting to the price we wish it was at. They're just, releasing another model instead of officially decreasing the prices to those prices we were hoping they would be at to begin with.
Yeah, and when I go to AMD.com, that was something I think we talked about these price drops 2 weeks ago, but they weren't like officially on AMD's website now. But now they are. And Amazon, what's interesting actually is it's already sold out. But on the official, this isn't AMD.com, this is the official AMD store on Amazon. The 16 core was $550, and that sold out immediately, which I'm sorry. I don't know how you're choosing any of these Raptor Lake high-end models when that's 16 cores. They use half the energy as $550.
Yeah, like the 7950X price cut that we saw. I think you and I both agreed that was probably like $50 more than they really even had to do. But I don't know. Nice to see.
Yeah, and so again, I just want to point this out to people. I am sure the margins on the 7900 XT and the 7900 XTX that's about to launch are up there the Lisa Sue tax we all expect, around 45% margins, or I would say at least above 30% for them. And those have 300 millimeters squared of 5 nanometer silicon, the Navi 31 configurations. The 7950X has total 140 millimeters squared. And then, the IO controller we're talking about, like about 200 millimeters squared, I think, or somewhere around there, of 6 nanometer silicon on Navi 31 as well. So you got 200 millimeters squared of 6, 300 of 5, with the 7950X 140 of 5, and I think 120 of 6. And yet they're selling it for $575, and they don't even need to include a cooler. So I just want to point out, again, anyone debating if AMD is making good margins, I think at these prices, AMD's probably got a 45% margin anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I would suggest AMD should do once they launch the Non-X is, by the time they launch those on January 10th, as I leaked, the products will have been out, what is that, October, November, December, 3.5 months or so. Yeah, almost exactly 3.5 months in term of weeks. I would suggest they should just put the X models slightly higher than what their sales prices were. So instead of $574, $599, instead of $474, $479, and so on and so forth for all these models, so that it was technically a sale. If you got it, then it was a better deal. But if you waited, there's nothing to complain about. And I don't know. I just don't. I have a feeling I won't be recommending Raptor Lake for almost anyone at this point. If the 7700 is the same price as the i5 7700, if you're just doing gaming, 7600X, which actually we'll get to that in the sales update, also sold out on Amazon. So it was all pricing. It was all $50 is what people cared about, apparently.
Well, I think that's, for most things, components being sold today, that's really is the important issue. Like, it's just, is this more expensive than I think it should be, and are there other options available? Because if both of those things are true, then yeah, you're going to go with whatever the overall platform cost will end up being cheaper. And, for the first bit that Raptor Lake and Zen 4 were available for, I think Raptor Lake was, from a price perspective, the better option. And now AMD just needed to adjust its pricing a little bit, and it's selling out, which, yeah, that's not really a surprise to me. It'll be, hopefully those prices hold relatively close to what they are doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and another reason I didn't do a video on it, these price drops, besides the podcast coverage of it, is I wanted to see what happened to AMD.com's website, because they said Black Friday sale, and I was like, And then I waited, and it said holiday sale, and I'm like, so they just changed. Who knows what they'll say after holiday sale in January or something. But I think that's where it starts to become absurd. If it's like Valentine's Day
it's
sale.
It's the Three Kings Day holiday special.
They go to Mayo sale. They just keep changing the banner.
Well, if they can tell you minus 10%, or I think it's a little funny from Amazon, minus 28% or whatever they say the 7950X is, they're going to advertise it as a sale because, well, you don't want to miss out on that deal that's never going away, Tom.
Mm-hmm. And I guess The one thing I want to say about this is I was never quite sure how they would handle this. Would they just let retailers sell it for less? Would they, we now know they did, subsidize the cost to try to get more market share? And all of this was kind of balancing. Do they want to save chiplets for Genoa sales, eventually for Dragon Range sales for laptop? Do they really care if they lose a little market share in desktop? Because arguably they weren't selling as well as Raptor Lake, but I've gotten some more sales data in them. Overall for the year, Raptor Lake slightly outsold Zen 4. And well, as of like a week or two ago, I don't know, maybe it's now hasn't. But but maybe AMD doesn't care if they lose 10% do-it-yourself market share if they have more yields for Genoa. But at the same time, I always wondered why they didn't do pricing like this. Like, again, 600 for the 16 core, like 500 or 450 for the 12 core. Because even though they could be using these yields for Genoa, this is the start of a new platform. And if you get someone to buy AM5 now, we just upgraded to Zen 3, Dan. I mean, you could have people buying AMD chips for their motherboard for 5 years. I thought it was odd they weren't more aggressive in pricing. Like, go down to whatever margins are the minimum you'll accept for Zen 4. Zen 5 is going to be way better, but if you get people to buy in now, they'll be way more likely to buy Zen 5, 6, 7 for the next 5 years. I just thought it was so weird they kind of like were scared to charge less for like the 7600X and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just speaks to, I don't think they thought Raptor Lake would be as good as it turned out to be, and a lot of people just decided to not buy Zen 4 because people are kind of expecting a price drop because they've been offering the same core counts now for 3 generations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think also again, I was talking to a contact today about this. I think AMD thought they could just be Intel. Like they thought, during the Coffee Lake era, there was the 6-core, only 6 threads i5, I think 8600K for like $300 or $250 to $300, somewhere around there. And meanwhile, AMD had like the 1600X and 2600X selling for like $200 with 6 cores and 12 threads. And it was like, well, the i5 may cost more and use more energy and have 30% less multi-threading performance or more, but it wins in gaming by 10%. So it's okay that Intel's charging more for it. And I think AMD said, well, the 7600X costs a little less than the i5, uses half the energy the i5 does, and wins in gaming by 10%. This is just like what Intel did before, except now we cost a little less and use half the energy. And I guess people aren't ready for that. They always expect AMD to have more multi-threading performance, no matter what.
Yeah, and I don't know. I guess this was the first generation where AMD was kind of humbled, and they needed to be.
Yeah, I don't know if they needed to be. Again, yeah. I'm like, why can Intel charge I think maybe I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong. I'm just so annoyed that like there is a double standard.
There is a double standard, but or there was. I guess we'll see. I think Intel has been humbled over the past 4 years to an extent too.
True.
So you have 2 competitors now that I think are more or less on equal footing, at least for the past couple generations, and we can talk about Alder Lake also came out a decent amount later than Zen 3, but I think you still have more or less equal competitors. One of them can't be cocky because every generation their CPUs are really neck and neck, and we're really cutting hairs here when we're talking about which one is quote unquote better at this point.
Well, and I guess to make a pro Intel argument here, I was really annoyed when Alder Lake came out and everyone was still kind of recommending Zen 3, and I'm like, guys, Alder Lake's better at everything. What are you doing? And they were like, yeah, but I'm scared of E-cores. And it's like, oh, okay. So to be fair, this happened to Intel and now it's happening to AMD. And I think Intel learned back then as well, even if I don't agree, just kind of like I don't agree now on AMD's side. I think Intel learned back then that just because you have an Intel badge does not mean you get to charge more for an i5 that uses more energy and has new cores people see as scary.
Yeah.
This piece of content is brought to you by Silver Knight PCs. Silver Knight PCs is a disabled, veteran-owned GPU and CPU retailer, PC repair shop, and boutique PC builder that is located in Fayetteville, North Carolina, but they ship globally. So if you're in the area, drop by their location to pick up reasonably priced components to upgrade your PC, and know that all of these components come with up to a 3-year warranty, and even refurbished products have warranties on them, and you can trade in your own parts for refurbishment as well, or contact them online and ask them about anything else you want them to do for you, including building a custom PC designed just for you. They're very easy to talk to. The owner of the company even sat down with me for a broken silicon last year and had a candid conversation about GPU shortages during the GPU shortages. They really are on the side of the consumer, and they really do put a lot of effort into making everything they sell the best it can be for their buyers. And I know this from firsthand experience. I got my RTX 4090 Supreme Liquid, the one that I am using to render this video in my PC here, and before sending it, they upgraded the thermal paste and thermal pads, and, well, you can watch the process online. It's actually really cool, and the thing, well, I can tell you that it just doesn't get hot no matter how much power I let the dang thing use, and I can let it use a lot of power. So whether you're in the Fayetteville, North Carolina area and you want to pop in to buy a graphics card, or you want to custom order something from them online, click the link in the description and use offer code BROKENSILICON to get 6% off all orders. Using this offer code BROKENSILICON helps me a lot, and it helps them. And I am genuinely happy to finally get their sponsorship, as they really are a business that I can stand by as high quality and of genuine reliability. Go to Silver Knight PCs and use offer code BROKENSILICON today. And I am turning off this discussion as we move to story number 2. December GPU, CPU supply, and pricing update. As has become a standard update in Q4 Broken Silicon episodes across the board, let's once again talk about the notable sales and pricing updates on the gaming components we love to discuss. The RTX 4080 is still an unmitigated sales disaster. This writer can honestly say that he has not seen a launch go this badly in his life. The RTX 4080 remains relatively easy to get around MSRP in nearly all regions 2 weeks after launch. Before we started recording, I checked Newegg. Go buy 4080 for $1,200 you can. I haven't seen that happen. 2 weeks of easy purchasing on a new electronic ever. Usually it's like 2 weeks after it's easy to get. First day it's easy to get, but sells out. Generally speaking, you're just able to get a 4080 around MSRP. And it's been a problem for retailers. Retailers have resorted to preventing cash returns of the 4080s at Micro Center and Newegg, as reported by Moore's Lasdy. Apparently, this is because half of the day one 4080 sales were scalpers that tried to sell 4080s on eBay for $2,000. No one bought them, and now they're demanding refunds for their cards that they tried to sell at a marked up price. And Newegg is saying we're not taking them back, which good. And by the way, Dan, I noticed this on the recent live stream. I looked at the PS5 scalpers as well. There are scalpers trying to sell PS5s for $600 to $800 on eBay. Sony's selling the PS5 not marked up on eBay themselves.
Screw it. Why not?
Just fuck these scalpers. And that's exactly what all these companies should do. AMD should make their own eBay account, put graphics cards on eBay next to the scalpers. So should Nvidia.
I mean, why not?
And just say, if you search for PS5 on eBay, the Sony one comes up, $600 comes with Ragnarok and a headset. Or you can pay $650 for a scalp PS5. Like, just this, it's a beautiful thing to see. But anyways, moving on to another sales disaster. Moore's Law is Dead can report that the A770 has had nearly no stock shipped compared to even the 4080. And yet, multiple retailers have reported to me, the person reading this, that it's still hard for many locations to get rid of the A770s. Nobody wants ARC, even if they are collector's items in terms of rarity. And moving on to what you should buy right now for the price, the RX 6800 XT and 6900 XT are honestly seemingly selling out at $500 to $650 respectively. And it seems like AMD will indeed be able to successfully get rid of most of high-end RDNA 2 in preparation for the Navi 32 launch 2 to 6 months from now. Meanwhile, the RX 6700 10GB, that is the cut-down 6700 XT, is an interesting 1440p option that comes with 2 games for $330. It's kind of becoming my default mid-range recommendation. And don't kill me when I bring this card up again. Let me finish, everybody. The RX 6500 XT is an interesting one to watch for ultra-budget shoppers, as I have seen it drop below $100 after rebate coming with games. Meaning if you wanted Callisto Protocol and I think Saints Row, you're kind of getting the card for free. So, I don't know. And I've seen the 6500 XT at $150 quite often as well. So, I don't know. Watch that one if you need something for an ultra budget build. Because if someone wants one of those games, you're kind of getting the card for free. Then moving on to the used market. The RTX 3060 Ti and the 6800 non-XT are the models to look out for in this writer's opinion. I've seen the 3060 Ti close to $300 used and the 6800 $400 or less used. It's always different. Like on the new market, the 6800 was a better deal, but then you wanted used 6800 XTs. Now you want new 6800 XTs for $500 to $600 and used 6800s for like $400. And then for CPUs, we've already discussed it, but the 7950X and 7600X are selling out. I believe the 7900X is selling out. Honestly, it's hard for me to recommend anything in new builds besides either Zen 3 and Alder Lake that often comes with free motherboards now, or Zen 4 that is like 30% off. And at Micro Center, I think there's a free RAM deal again at these prices. So you get like $50 off a motherboard. The CPUs are 30% cheaper than what they were, and you get free 6000 megahertz RAM. If you're doing a new high-end build, Zen 4 is the obvious choice, especially from a Micro Center. Use the Moore's Law's Dead links if you go there. And I've also been alerted that if you are someone that went to Micro Center and got the CPUs before the discount happened, Micro Center should argue a payback. They'll just give you $50 back because the price dropped less than a month after you bought it. So kind of a disclaimer there as well. But I thought, this is actually the last new news episode of the year, Dan. I thought it would be good to have a final discussion about the pricing of all of these different products on the market as they stand right now one more time. What do you think of all this? Anything that sticks out to you? Any thoughts?
I mean, it's just the other the other shoe finally dropping with prices on RDNA 3 at least. I actually don't know how Ampere is holding up right now when it comes to pricing. Ampere seems
it's still more than I think it should be.
Ampere seems to be weirdly holding its value more than it should. For some reason, there's
always something used from the Ampere lineup on eBay that's a good get. Like I think a month ago there were 3060 12 gigabytes selling for like $250 in bulk. There you go. Now there's 3060 Ti's for $300. Get that. But yeah, like some of them are going up in price even on the used market again. I think 3080s used are okay still, but 3070s continue to be a bad buy, to be honest, which is funny because that was like the 1 Ampere card I genuinely liked at MSRP.
Yeah, so looking at eBay, 3080s are selling for around $650 right now. So probably 6900 XT new is a better choice.
I think so.
But I don't know. That's what stands out to me for the most part is if you need to get a new graphics card and you don't want to like take the dive and spend $1,600 on one, like the 6800 XT and the 6900 XT seem like the best options you have right now because everything else is just so stupid, frankly. The 4080 is just one of the most disastrous cards I've ever seen, and hopefully
we'll talk about it more later with reference to the 4070 Ti.
Hopefully their hand is forced and they have to drop the price on that thing eventually because it might be a decent card at like $900 or something, but other than that, even I don't know, man.
It's like it depends what else is on the market because you can get a 6950 XT for like $800. Let me check. I mean, I have it pulled up. For, I think, 800 new. Yeah, 800 new comes with 2 games. You can get a 6950 XT from AMD's own website for $800. It's hilarious how even that kind of the card that was never meant to be good price performance looks decent compared to a 4080. 4080 is probably like 20% better than that. So, and it actually, uses about the same energy and has the same amount of RAM. So you're paying 50% more for 30% more performance. Doesn't come with a free game. Might not fit in your case. And that's I don't recommend the 6950 XT generally. And I think the 6900 XT, is that sold out? They had one there. It is. The 6900 XT was $680 from AMD's own website. Almost half the price of a 4080 for 75% the performance, same amount of RAM. So it's just so hard to. That's how bad the 4080 is.
Yeah, you normally expect a shift in. Well, there has been a shift in price performance, to be fair, but you kind of expect newer generations to change that more, and it really hasn't. And they're just kind of making the 4080 is just kind of making older cards look like a better option now. You know what I mean?
Which we've discussed. That may have been their goal, but
I think
they didn't expect it to be this much of it work this well to make you buy last gen.
Yeah, I know, and I think they accidentally made AMD just look like the good option, because Ampere, like you said, there are always 1 or 2 good options for Ampere, but RDNA 2 is all around. I just think if you're not looking to get a 4090, is generally what people should be buying if they're getting new cards right now.
Yeah, and I mean, there's always been, I had a backup RTX 3050 I used for a while, as you know. I thought that was kind of okay at 250, but I don't think that's there. Yeah, it's around 300, and it's no, it's now the 6700 10 gigabyte is around 300. The 3050 is silly. Most of this, and this was a calculated move by AMD. They were NVIDIA's trying to maintain 10 to 20% profit margins on the stuff they're selling. We're just going to accept 0% profit and get rid of everything this holiday season. And they're doing it, and it's selling out. And it should be. This is, for most people, I think RDNA 2 is more than enough anyways. And at these prices, it's easy for me to recommend. It's why I made that video. Don't wait for the 4070 or 4070 Ti, because we'll get to it in a second. I just can't see how it's going to really make you feel burned, assuming you actually need a card. Now, obviously, waiting will always give you some benefit, but if you need a card now, there's no reason to be I'm not going to game well this holiday season. Just get something now. There's so many good options.
Yeah, and I think the main thing you'll be losing out on is some ray tracing performance with newer generations. But even then, I don't. It's not the increase you're getting isn't a huge. Isn't completely different from the raster performance difference. Ray tracing isn't increasing that much quicker than raster is. So I don't know. I guess with a 4080 or 4070, I should say, you'll probably get slightly better than what you would have with a 3090 or something. But I don't know. Maybe not that much, or 3080. Maybe not that much better though.
Yeah, and the only thing I have to report here is I guess I won't say who, but yeah, I was talking to a contact whose job is to follow this sort of thing. And me and him were talking about how we had both heard that it seems like more is coming in January from Nvidia. So I just want to point that out too. I can't be 100% sure more RDNA 2 needs to get rid of and is on the way. But when you see Ampere selling out, I think from the sound of it, Nvidia has successfully sold off at least half of GA102 stock in this overstock thing we've been talking about for 6 months now. But that a new wave of cards is coming. Just because it's sold out at Best Buy now does not mean they don't have another few boats of shipping containers of 3070s coming to Best Buys in January. And from the sounds of it, they've still got a lot more coming January. And I think a lot of what they do with launch volume for the 4070 Ti and pricing is going to depend on, do we think we're almost through this, or are we only halfway there? And that will tell us how much of a real launch the 4070 Ti has.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But don't count out that just because it's sold out now doesn't mean more is not coming of even Ampere, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I mean, yeah, we don't know how many warehouses left they have of it, and we don't know where the warehouses are, whatever. So, I don't know. It's really hard to guess how much more freaking stock Ampere has, because, NVIDIA is kind of advertising this is our lower end stuff now for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, they openly put in the lineup 4090, 4080, 4080, because there were two, the 4080 brothers, and then 3080 and downward. They just openly said, don't wait, buy our old stuff for the MSRP it's had for 2 years, which is ridiculous. But let me move on to some reader mails here. Max to the Max writes in, and he says, first of all, I was very sorry to hear about Reesie. Her last days seem to have been full of love and compassion, though. May her memory be a blessing always. I was thinking this, Dan, she kind of will live on forever in like dozens of ads being a goofball.
Yeah, that's true.
The only thing I regret with Reesie is I kind of wish I would have uploaded more videos to the community of like how smart she was, because it was hilarious, the tricks she could do. But I don't know. I guess there's always time for me to do that in the future. But continuing to his real question here, thank you for the thoughts, Max, to the Max. I have some more thoughts on the 4080 now that the dust seemingly has settled on opinion. I think it's interesting to compare 40 series segmentation with 30 series. The verdict on the 3090, from at least Hardware Unboxed and other people I follow, was that it wasn't enough of a performance game over the 3080 to be worth the price difference. Even before the 90 SKUs were introduced, Nvidia would traditionally impose a steep premium on flagship SKUs when it comes to performance per dollar. This time, though, Nvidia has done it the other way around. When I first saw the announcements and how different the CUDA core counts were between the 4080 and the 4090, I actually thought it was a positive that Nvidia was separating the 90 and 80 SKUs and giving them both more of a reason to coexist, although pricing on both was still way out of the range I consider for a graphics card in general. However, your recent video, you mentioned that retail customers were entirely rejecting the 4080 and then asking when 4090s would be in stock or asking to buy a 4090 instead. My question is Nvidia really all that heartbroken about this? Steve from Gamers Nexus assessed the 4080 pricing and said he felt like it was an upsell to the 4090. Well, I would stop short of saying that the shockingly poor 480 sales are some sort of 4D chess move by Nvidia. It did ship fewer 4080s to retailers than 4090s, so Nvidia probably didn't intend to have a record-setting bad launch, but I don't think it'll be too disappointed either. If I had to guess what Jensen is thinking, it's maybe, I don't know, I guess let's just move more of my wafer allocation to 8102 and let 8103 trickle off the shelves over the next 18 months. If you want to give me $1,600 instead of $1,200, who am I to deny you? Again, not that this is some kind of grand plan, to be clear, but it does seem to play into Nvidia's hands ultimately either way. I mean, look, there's no doubt Nvidia wanted the price performance curve from 80 to 90 to be linear at best, and that they felt they had to do this to get rid of Ampere. But at the end of the day, they paid to ship these cards and they haven't sold. And that is something no company ever wants to see. Yeah,
and I think you can view it as like playing into his hand or whatever, but the reason this has happened ultimately is because they were stupid with how they sold Ampere, because they wanted to keep the price at that same level for the entire time it was sold. And now that's coming back to bite them, where their new launches are failing because they have so much old stock they have so much stock from their older generations. Like, that's not a good thing. That's just, we planned this poorly and now we have to use the 4080 as our sacrificial lamb to get rid of our Ampere stock.
Yeah, and I still find it so. I think the biggest problem the 4080 has to Nvidia is because it's selling so badly, it destroys their lineup. Again, if they would have made the 4080 have the full die, pushed it with faster memory, made it 10% better than it is now, so that it was only like 20% away from the 4090, and then they called it the 4080 Ti, and then they called the 4080 12 gigabyte just the 4080 and made it like $800 or $700, I think people would have let it pass. But that's not what they've done. They have gotten rid of their $900 option, and now their only 80 of the 80 brothers is $1,200, and it isn't selling. So what do you do with the 4070 Ti? Because if the 80 was selling well, they would have said, we're going to price it at $800. but it's not.
Yeah.
So it kind of destroys a lot of what they can do with the rest of their lineup, and I think it is going to force them to drop the price on the 4080. I just don't see how they can't. They can't launch a 4080 SE, and they're going to call their next card the 4070 Ti, as me and others have leaked. There's no room in between for another one.
Yeah, and you know, I've been thinking about this too. Like the 80 series or 80 of every generation, that's what they always position as their flagship. Like the 80 from Nvidia is like kind of almost a brand in and of itself. And they completely destroyed their flagship brand this
it's
generation.
It's kind of like what Intel did to the i7 with like against Threadripper. It just made i7 mean nothing to me.
Yeah, and I think that's what they did with their 80 lineup, and their 80 series is going to look really bad this generation because the floor with what the 80 can be is way too high. Where the floor with the 80 is too high, at least from a price perspective. Performance perspective, maybe not, but now they're in this just weird territory where they're going to have like a Gulf that makes any 80 series card look stupid. So like they can try to release a 4080 Ti, but what is that going to be priced at? How powerful is it going to be? Is it going to be almost a 4090? It's just, I think every card in the 80 series looks kind of stupid. So you'll just have a 4090 and then like a 4070 Ti, which is as strong as it can be for like $800 or $850 or something stupid.
I think there's no way around it. Nvidia, for everyone who wants to should remember this, Nvidia thought Vega was going to be stronger than it was, just like it seems like all of us were hoping it would be. You know, they thought Vega would beat the 1080 by at least 20%, and it only beat it by like 5, arguably 0%. And so in preparation, though, they didn't know that's how it was going to pan out. And I forgive them. It had 8 gigabytes of HBM and 12 teraflops. NVIDIA had reason to think Vega would be stronger than it was. They dropped the 1080 to 500. They launched the 1080 Ti at the same pricing that 4080 was at. I would suggest what NVIDIA's probably going to do, if they really feel they need to, is something they actually thought they had to do before. Turns out they didn't. And drop the price of the 4080 probably to $900, and then probably allow AIBs to use smaller coolers so it's easier to do that, and then launch a 4080 Ti, whether it's an crazy overclocked 8103 model that actually adds 15% onto that die so that it can almost touch the 7900 XTX, or more likely a cut down 8102 that they just price at $1,200. The problem is, when do they do that? How much market share can AMD take before they do that? Because if they did it next month, they would look pretty silly. But I think we all know that's what they're probably going to do eventually, right?
Yeah.
Kerry No Sugata writes in, and he says, the 4080 is poor value and clearly not selling. For the upcoming launch of the 7900 XT and XTX, would you expect there to be a knock-on effect on what type of models the AIBs prioritize? In the current market, I think it's clear that buyers are looking for value for the money more so than last gen, and I'd expect this to apply to the 7900 XT just as much as the 4080. If I was a retailer, the last thing I'd want is even more overpriced cards collecting dust on our shelves. To be clear, I'm not suggesting that the more expensive models won't sell at all, but that more expensive models will have to offer real, not superficial benefits to sell, and I wonder if AMD's AIBs are looking at 4080 sales and realizing this may be a little too late. I think that's an interesting question, honestly, but I think there's no way around it. I think initial sales... Well, actually, you know, it's kind of easy for me to answer this. Most volume, I'm told, guys, directly, and I guess actually let me write down a timestamp for this. I am told that most volume, despite weird reporting out there against this, is reference models. So I don't think it matters. I think the reason you're going to see a lot of AIBs work on high-end coolers is because they can, and that's like 10% of the volume, and they already have a decent reference cooler they can slap a Sapphire sticker on. So from what I'm hearing, in fact, what I heard is there's a chance like outside the US, almost no launch models will be non-reference. And in the US, it'll be a very small percentage that are non-reference as well. So, Kerry No Sugata, I think their hands are forced anyways with how late, I don't want to say behind, but how late in the year these cards are launching. I think they're mostly going to be referenced by default.
Yeah. And as far as like the aftermarket models, I think we've talked about this before. I just don't. their place in the market is a bit tenuous, where I feel like they're kind of just there as another option for people to buy when they're in stock, because I don't know what benefit you're getting from most of those aftermarket models right now, other than like superficial difference in aesthetics and minor and a minor increase in like thermals, or I shouldn't say increase, a minor benefit to thermals is a better way to put it. And other than that, I don't know what the AIB aftermarket models are really offering. So, I mean, I think that this whole thing of them like selling a AIB model that's, I don't know, $200 or $150 above MSRP is kind of, it's kind of tenuous. I don't know what value that's actually bringing to the market anymore.
Well, I was going to talk about it with you later in the episode, but perhaps we should just talk about the story now then, since we're on the subject. Let me move what was going to be story number 5 to now become story number 3. ASUS confirms custom ASUS TUF RX 7900 XTX clock speeds. Quoting from Video Cards, as reported last month, ASUS was the first company to unveil its custom RADEON RX 7900 GPUs. These TUF gaming cards, TUF, are based on the 7900 XTX and XT SKUs with a custom, 3.6 thick triple fan design, also equipped with 3 8-pin power connectors. ASUS has now confirmed the clock speeds that will be applied on each of the 4 TUF models. ASUS official specs list so-called default and overclock modes. The latter is the highest official spec that can be applied through ASUS software called GPU Tweak. The clock uplifts are as follows. I'm just going to go down the list here. So the ASUS TUF XTX Overclock Edition has a boost clock of plus 4.6%, a game clock that's 6.7% above stock, and in default mode, the boost clock's 2.6 above, game clock 4.1% above stock. And then there is the TUF XT Overclock Editions. The boost clock is 5.6% above stock. The game clock of the overclock mode is 8.7% above stock. And then there's the default modes that are 4.1% and 6.5% boost and game clock, respectively. So there you go. It seems like AIB clocks should be 3 to 9% above stock, and these aren't even the Strix models either. So we can probably expect some AIB models that get to 10% above stock, I would say. But yeah, in other words, I would expect most AIB models to indeed have notable factory overclocks, unlike other generations, but they're probably only going to give you a 3 to 6% more performance above reference if they don't have faster memory. And the highest clock models are probably at most going to give you a 10% performance boost, again, unless they use faster memory, but I'm not seeing anything here say they will. So we'll have to see how much gas is left in the tank. There's clearly some gas left in the tank, not 0% like some people were suggesting, but also it does not seem like it is an easy 20% overclock either. I don't know. What do you think about this?
7%, or that's the biggest.
One of them got to 8.7%. Yeah.
That's not a non-zero increase in performance at all. That's definitely notable. But like, if the RAM isn't any higher clock, that's probably going to end up being, I don't know, maybe a 5% increase in performance or something. And I think you could probably make up for that with most reference models by just, tuning the settings in Radeon software.
Which they come with a 2.5 slot cooler, and I had no problem overclocking 2 slot cards 5 to 10%. I'm sure the same TDPs of last gen. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know what. There is a marginal benefit there, but I question how big it is if you have to get a card that's twice as big, spend, I don't know, $100 more than the reference design, and you're getting something, a default BIOS setting that, like, frankly, you could probably make up for by just pressing the overclock button in the Radeon software that's available now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't know. I also have a link in the description that shows Sapphire is already teasing Vapor X. They haven't teased Toxic yet, but they're teasing Vapor X cooler. So, and I've been tipped off, actually. I think Sapphire is going to push one of these models really hard, maybe to 500 watts. So We'll have to see how well that performs. I would just say out loud, it's probably too late because all decisions have already been made, I'm sure. But we just say to Sapphire, this isn't worth 500 watts unless you're using 24 gigabit per second memory, 20% faster, because otherwise the bottleneck just probably is not the clock.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you'll see those coming, and I think at the end of the day, what we can expect is a lot of the tough models do seem to use 3.6 slot coolers that will probably cost you $1,200. But most day one stocks should be reference design, I think. And if no one buy, you know what? This would be hilarious. Like, who's to say on day one we might not see all the reference type models that are $1,100 and less sell out, and then people treat the $1,200 models like the 4080, and then all AIBs realize, okay, well, time to stop production of that crap.
Well, and frankly, the $1,200 models will be the 4080, so it's not that much better, really.
Well, they'll be like 50% better performance or something.
That's true, I guess. If we're talking raster performance, it's that overclocked Strix model or something is still probably better than the. Or not? Is it? No, it's not the Strix. The tough model.
This is the tough. The Strix. We'll see how much that costs.
Yeah, the tough model for like $1,200 or whatever. It's like still probably a better deal than the 4080 as it stands right now.
No, we don't know the pricing on this yet, though. I don't think.
I don't believe they said the pricing. I'm guessing.
Right.
The pricing.
So if the tough model is like $1,050 and it's like 5% above stock, all right, whatever. But
that's,
if it's $1,200 for that, that's pretty stupid.
Yeah, that's a linear benefit. So if it's available for you and you don't care about spending $50 more,
and you can fit it in your case,
I guess go for it.
QH Freddy writes in and he says, how do you think inflation would affect the $1,000 round cutoff you seem to think there exists, where people actually think about whether they want to buy something? So this was a thing I suggested pretty heavily recently of like, I just think what we've learned, even though I thought it might be 600, then 7, then 8, what it turns out is once you hit $1,000, no one blindly buys something. I think a lot of people are either used to buying AMD or Nvidia. Adored TV actually talked about this years ago too. Like, and they go, "What's my budget?" You saw this. Me and you were mods on the we were advisors or whatever it was called on the Tom's Hardware forums like over a decade ago, and people would just be like, I want to buy AMD. What should I buy for 120? I mean, you were like, whatever they have for 120 then. Like, same with Nvidia. It was usually Nvidia people too. I think that most people say, I always buy Nvidia. What's $300? Oh, the RTX 3050. Well, I'm buying the 3050. Doesn't even look at the 6700 or 6650 XT. I think that changes at $1,000. I think at $1,000, people just go, nope, I did my research. I'm going to buy the best one.
Yeah.
It's a car. I'm buying.
And as far as like how that changes with inflation, I don't know what you think, but like, I don't think people perceive inflation as like, well, the dollar is 7% less, so that means I should be willing to spend 7% more on everything. I think that you actually have the opposite effect, where if you have buying power, your buying power for $1 decreases by 10% or something, so you need to spend 10% more on all of your essentials, and your wages don't go up. What you have is people saying, my pocket is a little my wallet isn't going as far anymore, so I can't spend as much on bullshit luxuries. So
I was gonna say, it's like I buy chicken right now, and it seems like the chicken pricing has gone down a bit. Like inflation is slowing down and even backstepping slightly. I think you go, well, I have to spend 20% more on chicken now. I'm going to actually buy less expensive graphics cards because I don't need them.
Yeah, because if you have a person that's making, let's say, like $50,000 a year or something, and now they're spending 30% more on gas, 20% more on groceries, do you think they're going to be like, well, I can also spend 5% more on a graphics card? No.
Yeah. No, I don't think they will. And to directly answer QH Freddy's question, I think the cutoff stays. I think because people have less well, yeah, but I think also just directly, I think what it means is I think people will accept the minimum graphics card pricing a little more as it being raised, just because, again, it becomes like food. Well, the cheapest graphics card that isn't completely ridiculous. Like, well, you can spend 120, get a 1630 or an A380, and it's like, yeah, well, I'm not going to buy those. They suck. I think the second the price performance curve isn't god awful, they just go to 300, and I think people will accept $300 as the new lower mid range, whereas it used to be 150. But I think the $500 round number and the 1,000 stay because they have less money to spend. So I think those numbers actually just stay. That yes, companies will charge more because of inflation, but also people are going to be a lot more discerning in what they're willing to spend at those round numbers. I don't think they move. At least not for a long time. I would say that. And it would be one of those things where, like, I don't know, what did it take, like 5 to 10 years for us to accept smartphones costing over $1,000? Like, now we do, but it's going to take a while for people to accept anything over $1,000. Well, it's going to have to be like, I'm used to paying $500 for a high-end card, whereas it used to be $350 or something.
Yeah, and if like wages were to start increasing by like 5% year over year, well, then that would change a lot. But that's not happening yet, at least.
And I think, though, still, even if people get, which wages are going up, but I think even if people make 30% more money, they're still going to look at $1,000 as $1,000. We haven't gone through Weimar Republic inflation yet, so
yes,
you know. And again, even then, I don't think it was a matter of, well, it makes sense I'm paying. I actually have a framed mark downstairs from that era. I don't remember what it was. I think it was a trintillion, a quintillion. I mean, you know, I don't think people go, oh, well, I'll spend $1 quintillion now. I think they're just like, I need bread.
I think, yeah, in the Weimar Republic, they were like, well, this is cheaper to burn than spend on heating, so I guess I'll burn this money now.
Yeah, it wasn't like, I'm making a calculated decision to do this because of tomorrow's, all right. Let us then move on to B-Fish, because this will kind of lead into the next one. I'm going to skip around again, Dan. Forgive me. He says, hi, Tom and Dan. Question for you all about RDNA 3 product stack. With the RDNA 2, there was a big gap in performance between the 6800 and the 6700 XT. I mean, there's like a 25% difference, was there not? 30? It wasn't absurd.
Yeah,
it was like a 50% difference.
That's pretty big for two products, though, I would say.
I would agree, but the 3080 and the 1080 and the 1080 Ti were 35% apart.
Oh yeah.
The 10, I mean, there's, but I don't know. I push back a little that there was a huge difference. Let me move on though. He says, with Navi 31 being only the 7900 cards so far, I don't see how they're going to segment Navi 32 and 33 into 80, 70, and 60 class cards. They've had to put two of them on a die. They'll have to put two of them on a die, I suppose, with the 7800 XT and 7700 XT. There doesn't seem to be enough room to differentiate the tiers. Even if top Navi 33 is similar in performance to a 6800 and 1080p even, which I would say is kind of the best case scenario at this point, it's better than Nvidia, but not really great gen over gen uplift. Well, B-Fish, I'm actually going to move on to story number 4 here, which is, because I actually make it a lot about a few things. RTX 4070 details leak. Will Navi 32 destroy this? And so let me just write down the timestamp there. All right. So recently I leaked 4070 Ti details in the live stream. The 4070 Ti launches January 5th. Reviews are January 4th. And the 4070 Ti, I'm not 100% sure yet. I probably will know within about a week. But you should think of the 4070 Ti as probably being a 4080 12 gigabyte, but with a 250 to 275 watt TDP, maybe with 2 to 4 SMs disabled, and almost certainly sold for $600 to $750 at the beginning of January. The volume and supply information is still forthcoming. Stay tuned. But basically, I want to then compare if Navi 32 is likely to defeat this, since we have the time this episode. So let's do an analysis here. If Navi 32 can compete well with the 4070 Ti. So if I divide the amount of CUDA cores in the 4070 Ti to the 4080, again, assuming it's basically just a 4080 12 gigabyte with a lower TDP, we are looking at 7,680 CUDA cores divided by 9,728, and then it's 504 gigabytes per second of bandwidth divided by 717. My rule of thumb for performance is, teraflops, if it's the same architecture, teraflops difference plus bandwidth difference divided by 2, we should expect the 4070 Ti to be 25% weaker than the 4080, which I believe is pretty close to what NVIDIA's own leak charts showed it. Maybe it was like 25 to 30% different. Now, for Navi 32, 3,840 divided by 5,376 stream processors, 640 gigabytes per second divided by 800, assuming, there's no RAM speed surprise, and it is, 256-bit versus 320-bit in the 7900 XT. And we'll find the Navi 32 should be 24% weaker than the 7900 XT. So let's think about this then. We know the 7900 XTX should be around 50% better than the 3090 Ti. And we know the 4080 is only about 20% better than the 3090 Ti. So AMD has the advantage here. If we take the 25% less than NVIDIA, 24% less than AMD, this comes to a point where the 7900 XT should be about the same, if not 5 to 10% better than the 4080. And then the top Navi 32 should be probably the same, if not 5 to 10% better than the 4070 Ti and raster. And again, this is assuming they don't use faster memory or higher clock speeds on Navi 32, which it's rumored they will. So I don't know. I would conclude that a lot of people are showing concern about this, but especially if they push clocks and memory speeds on Navi 32, I think the 7800 XT, if it used Navi 32, would only be 20 to 25% weaker than the 7900 XT. That's a standard tiers difference in performance, wouldn't you agree, Dan? And it'll beat the 4070 Ti. So with all of this in mind, at least based on the numbers I'm presenting here today, I think it would make sense for them to use Navi 32 for the 7800 XT. Do you have any thoughts on this, Dan?
The only thing I could think... The only thing I could think of, the reason they wouldn't want to use the there's no real rule or reason. Maybe they'll just make a 7850 at some point that uses Navi 31 or something. But I think as an initial launch, that seems fine. Mm-hmm. Because I think they like to release stronger models later on into their lineup, and I don't know if there will be really any room for Navi 32 to be much stronger than this theoretical 7800 XT.
Mm-hmm. And could they make a Navi 31 16 gigabyte card that is 20% disabled down to 72 CUs or something? They could, but that's only going to be about, I think, 10 to 20% better than this Navi 32 model that is a lot cheaper to make.
Yeah, that sounds like maybe a thing that they would release later in the generation, although I don't know. The segmentation might just be this generation. There's a somewhat wide gap between the enthusiast and or high end and mid-range this time around. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. Let's also keep in mind what this would mean. I know that what they call the 7900 XT is what I think should be called the 7800 XT. But at the end of the day, they did charge less for it. They charged $900 even if they changed the name. Mm-hmm. And so I'm pretty sure Navi 32 costs a bit less to make than Navi 21. It has a decent amount less silicon, uses less energy, can have cheaper boards, and so I'm forced to conclude that this Navi 32 based 7800 XT 16 gigabyte, if this is what they do, this will be a card that is about 10% better than a 6950 XT with better ray tracing, a lot better ray tracing. And they could afford to charge probably $600 for it, $700 at most. We'll see where they price the 4070 Ti. I have my suspicions on where it's going to be. But this means, as much as you can complain they're using Navi 32 for the 800 XT class, it is going to end up being 30% better than the 6800 XT, while possibly having the same MSRP and using less energy. So, yeah, people will make comparisons to 4080 12 gigabyte, but it's not the same. And it is bringing more performance, better efficiency, much better ray tracing, same amount of memory to the same price point of the previous gen. It gets a pass by me, and I think it will trounce the 4070 Ti.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess if they wanted to, there's still room to disable the Navi 31 more, but I don't know. I just there right now there doesn't sound like there's really a reason they would need to do that unless they are on board with the AMD subsidy that has to be offered for the people to buy their cards.
Yeah, and again, let us remember that the 7900 XT, I believe, is cut down by like 11% on a 300 millimeter square die. 5 nanometer has better yields than 7. I don't know how many of these dies that are like overall close to the size of a 3060 need to be cut down by 20%, guys. I really don't.
Yeah.
And they can always make a 7850 XT that is also 16 gigabyte based on Navi 31. That's always an option to do. And maybe that's what they will do if they want to launch something with 16 gigabytes before Navi 32 is ready for launch. Because that's the one thing I got to say is, from what I'm hearing, Navi 32 isn't ready. So I think it's like late Q1 or something. Like that's why that's the one thing that would make me go, maybe they use Navi 31 for the 7800 XT. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. And we'll see. I guess to me, that's just a matter of if there's enough yield or bad yield for them to necessitate having a card this soon on Navi 31 that's disabled by like assuming it's like, I don't know, 72 CU or something. What would that be? Like 30% almost?
I mean, I did the math. I think the most you usually... Oh, that's right. I turned off my phones. I think the most you usually see a card cut down by, even larger dies, is like 25%. Getting to 40% becomes obsessive.
Yeah, so
excessive.
72 is 25%. So 72 would be the max I think I would see it disabled then, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah. That's, I think, the most you should expect. And if that's where they would go down to, I don't know why you wouldn't instead just do a 60 CU Navi 32 and push the clocks up, because the sound of it is Navi 32 can hit higher clocks than 31. So, all right, so if it hits higher clocks, we're talking about like a 10-15% gap, but it costs more to make.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I kind of accidentally made most of this about Navi 32, mostly because I've talked about the 4070 Ti now in 2 pieces of content recently. I didn't want to overdo it with talking about that. But any final thoughts on the 4070 Ti? It's launching January 5th. It is going to be probably 95 to 99% the performance of what the 4080 12 gigabyte was going to be. What price do you think it will hit? What are they going to do? I'm just like, no one put a gun up to our heads here, people. We're just talking about it. What do you think?
I don't know. It's hard for me to guess. It's like, how stupid are they going to be, or how cocky are they going to try to be with pricing? Because hopefully it's something like 700, but I could see them being cocky and trying to pull $800 still.
Well, and I believe that it probably breaks even around $500 or something. So yeah, it's hard to say, because we know what the 3080 was. This has more RAM than the 3080, about the same silicon cost, probably about the same board cost, maybe a little cheaper boards. So I think with an Nvidia markup, they would want to at least have it $600. And usually the gap between 70 and 80 is 30 to 40% in pricing. If I multiply 0.6 by 1200, I get to 720. So I'm, and again, we know they're raising prices over Ampere. The 3070 Ti was 600. I'm just calling it. I think they're going to charge 649 to 749 because it's going to cost more than last gen, period.
Yeah, that's probably a good prediction. And hopefully they'll have learned their lesson from the 4080 that you can't just go completely ridiculous with pricing. So hopefully 700 or something like that.
But again, if this is 700 and the 7800 XT is similar performance, more RAM for 650, I mean, easy recommendation 7800 XT, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I completely agree on that. This fall, where you're trying to stay warm and avoid scary activation fees for Windows software, consider using cdkeyoffer.com. CDKeyOffer.com is a long-term sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead and its community for any time anyone in this community needs legitimate Windows keys and doesn't feel like paying excessive monopolistic licensing fees to get access to them. But that's not all they offer either. They also have great deals on PlayStation, Steam, Origin, and Uplay keys, and physical products like gaming chairs and keyboards as well. They are always running sales, but make sure you use the best codes possible provided for the Moore's Law is Dead community. Use the link in the description or on screen, and then use the code BROKENSILICON to get 25% off Windows codes or die shrink for 3% off everything else on the website. This really does help Moore's Law is Dead when you use these keys and click these links, and it helps you pay reasonable prices for products that, let's face it, you just kind of need sometimes and you don't want to overpay for. Go to CDKeyOffer.com today. But, all right, let us then move on, if I have this correct now, to story number 5. RTX 3060 8GB reviewed by Hardware Unboxed. And, all right, so on Sunday, Steve at Hardware Unboxed reviewed the 3060 8GB for those of the uninitiated. This card is the same, uses the same GA106 configuration as the desktop 3060 12GB that has a 192-bit bus. But, as the name would suggest, this model has only a 128-bit bus to accommodate only 8GB of VRAM at the same speed. That's right. It's basically in between a 3050 and a 3060 in specs, and in performance then it comes to, you guessed it, in between a 3050 and a 3060 in performance, being 25% weaker than the standard 3060, and also often costing more than a new 6700 XT that absolutely trounces it. So, what is there more to say? This should have been called a 3050 Ti or a 3060 SE. They haven't launched a 50 Ti yet. Desktop, Dan. This is ridiculous. But instead, it seems like Nvidia has just decided to once again lie to consumers, and Moore's Law that expects more odd models like this to appear as Nvidia desperately finds creative ways to dump Ampere stock onto the market over the next 3 months. So, this has been rumored for a while. I've already, I think, pointed out on the last Die Shrink, which is, of course, up only for patrons, that on Nvidia's official website, they even list the 3060 8GB and so on. It's out, and it is, I don't know. I never know what I'm really expecting out of this type of a thing. I'm always like, who knows? Maybe it'll only be 10%, 15% worse. Maybe it has more bandwidth than it needs. Nope. It needed the bandwidth. It was only 192-bit. It is 25% weaker. Well, I think in some scenarios, 30 or so percent.
I think it's an important caveat. It gets to like 30% weaker. I think the averages were closer to like 15% weaker for the 3060. But
were they?
Yeah.
Am I misremembering here? Well, let me pull up.
I think there's a big story here. Problem with what they're doing though, with the 3060 8GB and Hardware Unboxed hammer this home. They're not really like distinguishing the 3060 8GB and 12GB like on their boxes or anything. So I wouldn't even say like the untrained eye or something. Like I could see a person that knows what they're doing accidentally getting an 8GB model.
He did show that in the video. The boxes look the same. They're almost hiding that it was 8GB.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Like I expect Nvidia to have better advertising than the I don't know, a shady deal on Craigslist.
Yeah. Brett Summers writes in, he says, Tom and Dan, do you think the 3060 8GB will receive the same backlash as the 4080 12GB? I agree with Hardware Unboxed conclusions. It is incredibly anti-consumer and arguably has the same issue as the 4080 16 and 4080 12GB. Different tiers of performance, well, the name suggests it's the same with less VRAM. I take this as Nvidia has not learned their lesson from that debacle. This really should have come out at a lower price point and been named the 3050 Ti. Yeah, it should have been $300 3050 Ti, but it isn't. I'm going to give my answer first. No, it will not, because people don't care about these cards anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's a product line that's seeing its way out the door. This is just them trying to get rid of some of that stock that they need to get rid of and saving some money by buying 4 GB less of RAM. And they're doing it in the most shady way possible by not decreasing the price seemingly for the 8 gigabyte model, which is insane.
Just not a surprise though coming out of Nvidia.
No, it's not going to receive the same degree of backlash because this is like a quiet launch, and maybe that means it should receive more backlash. But that's how this market works, or that's how every market works. Like, the new hot ticket item is the thing that gets all the attention, and the old crap is just there, and they hope that they can get it out without having anybody really talk about it.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else there is really to say about this. I don't think it's as bad as the 4080 12 gigabyte because those were different dies and like 25 to 30% away. And you're right, I looked it up. Let me see here. So like, if I pull out the trusty calculator app here, we are looking at 67 divided by, this is in 1440p, which I think these should be able to do 1440p. Yeah, it's like 15 to 16% weaker. So you're right. It's not 25%. It does get up to there, or above there in a couple games. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is this. They really started doing this mostly. The first notable one I can think of is like the 1063 gigabyte. But I believe they just disabled like the minimum amount of SM's difference. And their argument was, look, we do have yields that are slightly worse. We don't want to turn all of these into some 1050 Ti thing. So we're launching the 3 gigabyte model. It's like 5% worse. If it's a less than a 10% difference, I don't care that much as long as it's the same die, although you could argue that shouldn't matter. As long as it's within 5 to 10%, yeah, below 10% difference, I kind of get the whole memory difference thing. But when it's two different, when it's like a full tiers difference, it's pretty screwed up.
Yeah, it's like this thing is closer to a 3050 than to a 3060, isn't it? Or
I think it's like squarely in the middle because it has one of its specs is the same as the 3050, one of them is not. Which again illustrates why when I was doing my math comparing Navi 32 to the 4070 Ti, my scratch math for a performance difference in the same architecture is teraflops difference, or should I really, well, yeah, I do core difference, but teraflops difference plus bandwidth difference divide by 2. And if you do that here, it gets to pretty close to 15.
Yeah, I just don't think there's much else to be said than this is bad. And, I'll just, to paraphrase like what Steve said in that review, like, this is borderline a scam. And I agree.
Yeah. I mean, it would be almost like if AMD had the 6700 10 gigabyte and they just call it the 6700 XT 10 gigabyte. Just call it a 3050 Ti Nvidia. You have the room in the lineup.
It would be like if they called it the 6700 XT and then on the boxes in a corner it said 10 gigabytes, really small with an asterisk on it.
Well, and of course there she is. She finally showed up. Jessie
she decided
came upstairs to sit next to me.
To barrel in.
She made a really adorable, like, baby rabbit noise when she yawned there. All right. Let us move on to the final story, which we don't need to dwell on for that much here, but I thought it would be fun to acknowledge it. Dan, Moore's Law is Dead hit 150,000 subscribers. I mean,
Yay.
It's... the only thing I'll say off the bat is... I just remember when all I wanted to do was hit 7970 subscribers, and I thought, man, if someday I hit 100,000, that'd be awesome. Maybe this wouldn't be a hobby.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is it's about 15 times more subscribers than I would have expected in like 2019, or I guess 2019 probably, but I don't know, that's kind of crazy.
I'm trying to like see what lights I can mess with here for like a party thing, but I don't want to cause seizures. So okay, so I can adjust the speed. This should be just enough, maybe. Oh, that's too much. Maybe we'll leave it here for the party lights. Yeah, and I mean, I remember when the channel really got going. I remember hitting 100, then 500, then 1,000 subs it was crazy. I was like, oh my god, I can even have YouTube ads on my videos. And then we started the podcast in 2019, halfway through the year. And then Gerard showed up like, I can do this. And now he's like editing full podcast videos and like directly uploading and helping with like half of the content. And now we have a renderer, Jean-Philippe, that I'm hoping to add to the thank you part of the podcast soon. And he's helped out with several leaks now. And I don't know. We'll see. We're at a point, though, where it is crazy. You know, you just look around at video cards or WCCF Tech or like even like Tom's Hardware and Tech Power Up. And I've noticed that once a week, kind of some tweet or piece of content we put out gets mentioned as part of the news. It's weird, you know.
Jesus, sorry. Yeah, I don't know. It's a really big...
Don't die. I know it's weird, but don't let it kill you.
It's a really big landmark. I mean, especially because for a little bit, I think the subscriber growth stagnated a bit, and this year it kind of blew up again. So, that's really cool to see. And, you know, I don't know what else to say. I guess the next big... We'll see how much the channel keeps growing, you know?
Yeah, and I think like in terms of like what more allows us to do is it just the bigger we get, the less we really care about how well each individual piece of content does, because we know we're getting enough to pay my bills, your bills, Gerard's bills, and it doesn't matter anymore. Like, and I think we're kind of almost there, but like if we get to the one thing I think about is though, if we got above 200,000, we would start to get the coverage, I think, where when we point out one of these companies as lying, they kind of have to pay attention to us. Yeah. And if we could get that big, I mean, guys, you know, thank God, like Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed and sometimes Linus Tech Tips, like call out these companies and have them actually respond to them. But imagine with how much little shit we put up with. Like, we don't do any fluff pieces. Like, if they just couldn't ignore what we were reporting, that's where I think you see real benefits to the community, though. You don't always have to agree with us. You don't always have to like what our opinion is. But I think we've certainly proven that if we have a problem with something these companies are doing, we say it. Yeah. And if we were as big as, even a third as big as some of these huge they are companies, some of them now, but some of these YouTubers that, man, they just couldn't ignore like the coverage. They couldn't ignore when they're trying to pull a fast one on consumers.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's even happened to a little bit already. So
yes, it has. Which, yeah. But let's see. OX Helios writes and says, "Hi Tom and Dan. My podcast app, Pocket Cast, just had a Spotify like year wrap recap." There's a tongue twister. Year wrap recap. Say that 10 times fast. He says, and this was by far my most listened to podcast, according to Pocket Cast. Congrats, guys, on the great job. The quality of this channel has greatly improved since I joined in 2020. We both agree on that. This is an amazing community to be a part of as well. I tried to attach an image, let me see, of the hours I spent, but I couldn't get it to work. So you'll just have to trust me. I believe you. I believe you that you listen to the podcast for many hours, and we thank all of our listeners on that. Let me see here. Maybe we should have made this the last thing we talk about, but yeah, we still have the wrap up. So let us now get in to the wrap up. These are the final stories that don't deserve getting their own story, but we believe deserve an honorable mention. I thought this was interesting, Dan. 600 hertz laptop panels are apparently coming.
You know, I've never seen a 600 hertz monitor. I'd love to see if I could reasonably tell the difference between that and like 120 or 240 hertz.
Yeah, I think the biggest that I've seen, or biggest, I've seen way bigger. I've seen, how many? I've seen 100-inch monitors, TVs, but no, the fastest refresh rate I've seen, I believe, was like 360 hertz or something at a gaming convention a year ago. And I have to say, going from like 180 to 240 hertz is where I think I do just like kind of stop seeing it. Like, I'm not saying I couldn't tell the difference between 200 and 120. I definitely could, but it stopped being that obvious, and things like ghosting, and like at a certain point it's just like how good is this monitor at even showing the refresh rate that fast, if that makes sense at all. But yeah, I don't know. I guess this is the same company that already has a 500 hertz gaming panel, and now they're making a 600 hertz one to laptop. The one thing I will say is I don't get, who needs a 600 hertz display on a laptop? You're just wasting energy.
Elite gamers on the go.
I don't think that. I think it's an oxymoron there. Like I always see this like thing of like 360 hertz 1080p laptop display, and it's like, could you just make it 4K 120 so I'm not wasting triple the frames in desktop guys? Or like this just seems like a waste of battery life.
Maybe, allegedly.
Not to mention, what laptop CPU is hitting 600 hertz? I don't know. I thought it's mentionable because it is cool to see us hitting 600 hertz. I have no doubt that I don't know why I'm putting it this way, but I think that's kind of how we should think about it in terms of technology echelons. By the end of this console generation, that we'll have 480 hertz monitors fairly regularly. I think by Blackwell, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you will not be using Lovelace to power them. All right, let us move on to the next story here. The RTX 6048 gigabyte, the card for some reason NVIDIA is using the same name for versus the Ampere variant. It's finally out. The drivers are out, and I think they're shipping. So I doubt that I will get my hands on one anytime soon, but I did manage to get my hands on an A6000 before and was very impressed. I would be really curious to see how this performs compared to my 4090, considering it has a 300 watt TDP. But I think we know now, actually, with the extra CUDA cores, it'll probably perform the same.
Yeah.
All right. Here's one that I think is definitely worth mentioning here. Need for Speed requires a BIOS update to not have flickering issues or something. Did you see that?
Yeah. That sounds... Have they said what the... no, they're not going to say what the issue is, I guess, but that's... You
have to do a BIOS update to your 4090 to not have issues on Need for Speed. Now, recently, I believe they updated this so that you can also update your motherboard instead or something. That's so weird.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard of that.
Yeah. I will say this, I did it while I was preparing the notes for this podcast this afternoon. I literally just downloaded the tool and just while I was typing, did it. It turned off two of the monitors, only activated my middle one, showed updating 4090, finished, all other monitors turned back on, and it was done. No issues whatsoever. So all I can say is that's weird, but you don't even need to reboot your PC to get it to work.
No, okay.
I don't know. Very weird, though. And then again, and speaking of one more weird thing, we have the Titan X engineering sample with only 2 display outs that at first everyone, including me, thought was a scam because this happens. People BIOS flash often a 1050. Yeah, like what's a common scam they would do? It'd be like they take a 1050 4 gigabyte or like honestly a GT 730 4 gigabyte DDR3, and then they'll find something and they would call it like, what's a 4 gigabyte card? I don't know, right? They'd call it some 4 gigabyte model, like a 570. I don't think they work because it'd be NVIDIA, but for the AMD, I guess a good example, they'd take like a 550 and they'd call it a 570 and BIOS flash it to Tech Power-Ups. GPU Z says 550, but then it only shows like a fourth the specs. That didn't happen with this, and it's been confirmed that this is just a Titan X engineering sample with a Titan X engineering sample cooler that for some reason only has 2 video outs.
Well, it's funny because like he objectively has a kind of worse card, but at least it's unique.
Yeah, it's weird. I did not catch how much he paid for this, though. Like, that's the one thing I want to know. Like, if he paid like $100, I guess it's like, it'll beat a 6500 XT in performance. So I guess there you go. But if he paid like $300, $400, I go, you're just getting you're just getting worse than a 3060 for 3060 pricing. I guess there's probably a few apps that use it better. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let us now move on to the final reader mails. Rafa Zaya writes in and he says, if you had a company making CPUs and could choose one architecture to build with, would you want AMD's chiplets or Intel's combo of E and P cores? Both.
Well, yeah, both. But
they're going to be both.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
I guess, you know what? Okay, so I can't, for some reason, I arbitrarily can't have 2 core types.
Yeah.
Chiplets.
Yeah, I would choose chiplets because look how many products you can make with a single design, essentially.
I mean, we had an Intel engineer on, and he said he directly just admitted, I'm envious what they can do with chiplets. They can literally make one design, spend a third as much as us on design costs, and just have the same chiplets for Everything, server and consumer. So the Intel engineer seemingly thought chiplets. So I'm going to go with chiplets. Pessimistin writes in and says, is there any words on new and upcoming VR hardware from reputable companies that respects their users' privacy more than Meta does? I've been considering Steam Index, but that tech is getting old, and that doesn't ship any product to my country. I mean, I think Steam's got a new headset coming out next year. Yeah, so if you want to wait,
Is there one officially announced by them, or no?
No, it's just like me and, sadly, it's Bradley have talked about it.
Okay. No, that'll come out. I mean, Vive makes stuff still, right? No one talks about them.
And then there's also Pimax that, I don't know, I haven't tried it out. I don't know. Look, the major players are honestly PlayStation and Meta, if we're being completely honest. Those are the two major players. And then after that, it's probably going to be Steam and Apple. And then after that, Vive and Pimax. So not really.
Yeah, I looked at to see what Vive had to offer. I think they're still doing some of the annoying crap that you have to put around. They have a new one, although it's mostly for media streaming and stuff. The what is it called? The Vive Flow, which the form factor looks interesting. So hopefully they adapt that to actually work for gaming at some point. But
yeah, I guess the one thing I would say about Meta is I've talked to, people know because I've done leaks involving it, several Meta engineers about working at the company and what their goals are right now. And I know some people will go, well, they're biased to say this. And it's like, no, some of them left the company, or some of them also definitely told me things they weren't supposed to tell me. So, no. I don't think that they're just biased towards Meta. A lot of these engineers don't care. Like some of my sources I've had for Sony leaks work at new companies now, and some of the developers that actually worked at outside companies now work at Sony. These people tend to work at these companies because they have a good job they enjoy more so than they believe in some ethos. And what they tell me is that Meta really is kind of slowly moving away from the data stuff. Okay. Granted, Facebook used to be the worst at it, but their opinion and what they tell me Mark Zuckerberg seems to think is this is not going to last forever, that Facebook does not own any operating systems. Besides maybe their own on the Meta Quest, and Facebook knows that people have VPNs, sometimes VPNs in the routers, that this is a losing battle trying to only make money from people's data, if that they need to pivot towards other things. And that's why they have renamed their company. So all I can say is, as much as they definitely use your data, I mean, everyone does, dude. And I don't think they actually see that as their be-all, end-all goal anymore. I genuinely do not believe they do. Mm-hmm. So if that makes you feel any better, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But yes, the top one's Meta and Sony uses your data too, for sure. Steam does too, though, guys. I don't know.
Yeah, everyone does.
So what I would say is Meta's probably worse than them, but I wouldn't assume they're trying to do anything evil with it. And they've actually disabled needing to sign in with Facebook, I believe, anyway. So they're removing some of those requirements. Brett Summers writes and he says, hello, Tom, and possibly Danny Boy. What is the state of AAA releases? I'm mentioning this because of the awful release of the Callisto Protocol. These aren't inexperienced developers here, nor did the people working on Callisto lack funding, and it's a stuttering mess. Thanks, Unreal Engine 4 CPU issues. I've had devs directly tell me Unreal Engine 4 has some real CPU issues actually with stuttering. But he goes, and is inconsistent at best across PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X. This seems to be the norm nowadays for some, to just every now and then games don't work well. Do you think that this issue primarily stems in AAA gaming because so many people just rush in and buy AAA games only? I rarely see these level of issues on indie or AAA or AA devs games. Oh, those indie games. Oh my God, State of Decay would like to have a word with you. He says, what gives? Are we destined to have subpar technical experiences in the AAA space as the norm? No, right now I can play God of War on a console at 90 hertz and it's gorgeous looking. Whatever the actual resolution is, it looks better than a lot of games I play in 4K on my 4090. So
yeah, and with God of War, I don't know. I can say what I played it too. I can say theirs bit was one weird graphical thing that I saw once in the game, and that's about it. But where for some reason in one area the water was rendered at two different adjacent areas, so like there was just like a thing like this for some reason.
It's in the rocky area?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw that, yeah. So, you know, nothing's perfect, but it's...
That's a very minor issue that I probably wouldn't have noticed if I didn't happen to turn one direction at one point.
And some people have said the new Call of Duty runs bad on Nvidia, but my 4090, granted not a weak card, but my 4090 runs it fine. I'd say my 3060 ran it, 2060 laptop ran it weaker than I would want it to be, but it runs it, and my 3050 runs it okay. You have a 6700 XT, it runs fine on yours. So we've tested it on 3 Nvidia cards and 1 AMD card, and it runs fine. Battlefield 2042 continues to be very schizophrenic and which update runs well. Right now it seems to run well. Last update sucked. Actually, they still have that new mouse raw input issue. So I don't know. It's a bit all over the place. I don't think it's AAA specifically. I think Callisto Protocol, they just didn't do a good job programming it for some reason. And I will say this, Unreal Engine 5 seems to kind of suck compared to 3 and 5 in terms of stability, from what developers have told me.
Yeah, and as far as what the issue is, it's been a problem for a while where some releases are just terrible at launch. And I think that's because a mix of they can go back and update a game, so if it doesn't come out in perfect shape, it doesn't matter that much at the end of the day, as long as reviewers don't get too mad and say, don't buy this, the performance is terrible. I think they have these compressed timelines sometimes, or games are getting more complicated.
Well, this just came out in December, right?
Yeah, or games are getting more complicated to develop and they miss crap.
Right, so I think, let's think about this. Cyberpunk, Callisto Protocol, these came out in December to probably meet some fiscal year thing. You see a December release. They're not always bad. I think there was a Need for Speed, years ago, that came out in December, ran perfectly. They said we just needed a month for polish. But I think when you see December releases, that's a red flag that they've begged and pleaded with their funders, when's the latest we can release this? And they're always like, first week of December, any later, and we're missing holiday sales. Mm-hmm. And they probably should have just delayed this to February, so it worked well.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm sure it will be updated and fixed over time, and the people that get it early suffer, and reviewers are probably panning it to an extent because they needed to fulfill some financial obligation, and the game suffered, unfortunately, because of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to anyone who says this is a AAA thing, I think it's more glaring because of how much money they have. It's like, how can you let this happen? But the money can become its own issue because then they have to get it out by a specific time. Mm-hmm. I don't know. State of Decay ran like such dog shit, and it still does, and I don't even know what's going on at that studio. I'm trying to think of, let me pull open my Steam library here. Like other games that I've had that have, or Deep Rock always worked well. Don't Starve worked well. The Forest ran pretty terribly for a while there. No Man's Sky ran well, just lacked content according to most people. Like Chivalry ran really well. There's an indie game, arguably. Bannerlord, it's up to what you think, but I think we can agree Bannerlord generally worked well.
Yeah, when I first played it, the resolution scaling was just hilariously bad.
But it ran fine, and I've seen that in AAA. Yeah, so I don't think there's a suggestion here that like all indie or not games run good or bad, really. I think you just have different reasons an indie game runs bad and different reasons a AAA game runs bad, right? Mm-hmm. I would say that for the budgets they have, though, you would think AAA, it wouldn't be a tie. You'd think they should be doing better. I will give that to Brett Summers.
Yes.
All right, well, that's all we got for this episode, Dan. I want to thank you, of course, for coming on and for everybody for listening. Remember, Double check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring that bell button. YouTube does unsubscribe you sometimes. Let's get to 200,000. Thank you to all of those who have already subscribed, though, that got us here. Like this, share this. Subscribe to more Broken Silicon on your podcast app of choice. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts. That also helps us get listeners from different avenues than YouTube. And support us on Patreon. Yeah. $2 gets you the last die shrink for free, no ads. Ask me and Dan, ask guest questions, get access to the Discord. $4 gets you Broken Silicon early ad free. Ask me and Dan questions every episode. Loose ends free questions. Thank you in the credits. Then there's higher tiers for even more thank yous and content. So there's a lot there for just like not even the cost of a cup of coffee a month. So we can't do this without our patrons. This is what gives us so much bargaining power. Do with sponsors and stuff to know, hey, if we don't secure a lot of sponsors this month, who cares? We're always going to be able to pay the bills. Again, one more time, I'm rambling. I'm tired. I need to start dinner. I'm annoyed at the technical issues we had before this. But thanks once again, everybody, for listening.
Goodbye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, I don't do this alone. Moore's Law is Dead is a team with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother, Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, and special assistance by Carbon Cry. Find all of our information, including the information of sponsors you can support, at www.mooreslawsdead.com. If you would like to send fan mail or hardware to us, please mail parcels to Moore's Law is Dead at P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. And speaking of fans, patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content possible. The aging business model of spamming ads all over the content is dying. The future of media will be built on fans paying for the content they actually want to exist. And so if you have the extra money, but only if you do, please consider supporting us. For just $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to have your questions read aloud on Broken Silicon, Die Shrink, and Loose Ends, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who would love to meet you and talk to you about computer hardware. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the entire back catalog of Flyover States podcasts and other projects Moore's Law is Dead has done, and thanks in the credits of videos and other perks as well. And hey, if you can't afford to support us, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family on social media, Reddit, and forums. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or your preferred podcast app. All of this really does help so much. And if you'd like to advertise on the podcast, hire Tom for consulting, or are a person of interest who would like to be a guest, please reach out to the email address mlhbdead@gmail.com. But as I said, this podcast would not be possible without its patrons supporting it, and so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher producer levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Full, AV, Anthony Greffa, Greg Pataki, Muhammad Akwari, Brett Jones, Aaron Close, Little Germany, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, Shredbird, Brian Riggleman, Dr. Forbin, Sam Miller, Deke, Thomas Rupp, The Mechanical Philosopher, Terrence Herod, SNES Chalmers, Tom Bailey, Great T. Wanchik, Andrew S., Frank Zielinski, Daniel D., MJB1, Eric Jackson, Justice Brennan, Sammy Good, Valcom Lev, The Boss Haas, Nicholas Buckner, Spamtum G. Spamtum, Jonathan, Lord Starstream, General Drips, Blake, Franco Frederic, Matthew Lazier, Jensen Wang, Nathan Mose, Aziris, Gregory S. Acker, Dominic Koch, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Cameron, Christian Lavoie, Hard4Room.com, Original Ross, Slicky, Lance Bassler, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, Christopher A. Butler, GZ Ziggy, Sarcastro, Stephen Hartz, David Sebastian, Mead and Pork Stew, Tim Robb, Luis Correa, Ian Clifford, Jesse Jaskowiak, Travis Gooding, Holden Mobley, Nanny and Chris Rich, Deepest Learners, Mad, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Chuck Glidden, Samuel Moss, Greg Autrini, Patrick Groh, Amiable Chief, Brett Summers, Milton, Stephen Dick, Tommy, Kunden, Brucha, Mark Mitchell, Mac Daffy, Delmaine Peterson, James Anderson, Mark Scholl Pierce, Mark Raidmaker, Dave Schultz, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Buma, Norithiel, Matthew Landavaza, Stefan Goal Addict, Henry Zhang, Judson N, Brendan O'Connell, The Grid, Michelle Pelt, D31337 Antics, Joseph Kelly, Noah Nokoela, Hexapuma, Chrysantine, Jerem Ferrier, Mayor Keith Moore, Kita Abdul Kadar, Precision, DNA Tech, Nicholas Alexandra, John O'Shea, Royce Meyer, Charles Russell, Reginald Ari, Slushba, Teak Autumn, Jackson Miller, JSMMH, Neith Razink, Mean Dean, Cal, Andre Jacques, Gaiman Since Reagan, Jeff Sadler, Jordan Simkovic, Loophole 35, Winstar, William Welpy, James I. Raider, Corey Leonard, Nalima, John Shin, Justin Bussell, Kelvin, Austin Haggerty, Roger Davies, Shay, Julian Leaked, Corey Chappelle, Evan Dingle, C2, John Iverson, Samuel Park, Aaron, The Eternal Dreamers, Jansen Angima, Mark Central, Derek Lambie, Michael, Forz and Forrest, Him Segung, Robert Davidson, Space Channel 5, Beer Motor, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.